Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar presentation on GASB statement number 102 related to certain risk disclosures. My name is Courtney Moore. I am one of the audit principals at Lauterbach and Amen, and I'll be talking you through this new GASB standard. So, what is GASB statement number 102? This statement was issued to improve transparency by requiring disclosures of certain risks. This is effective beginning for fiscal years that start after June 15th, 2024. So our first round of implementation will be with our June 30th, 2025 fiscal year ends. What is the purpose of this statement and why does it matter? With this new standard, the disclosure of certain risks will help financial statement users understand potential vulnerabilities of the entities they're reviewing. These are specifically important for bond analysts, credit rating agencies, taxpayers, and other oversight bodies. There are two key focus areas to consider for this statement. Number one being concentration risks, and number two being constraints. Let's start with concentration risks. This is when a government's exposure is tied to a specific single source. Think of those entities that have a large percentage of revenue tied to a major employer in a small town, heavy dependence on one taxpayer, or a certain grant source. So you can probably think of a few instances where this may be the case, and there are specific steps to consider when it comes to understanding when these disclosures are required. Note that all of the following must be true. A, the risk is known before issuance of the financial statements. B, the event is more likely than not to occur within the next year. And C, the event could significantly impact financial position or services of the local government. The second key focus area to consider are certain constraints. These are legal, contractual, regulatory, or other limits that could significantly restrict operations. Examples include legal limits on property tax rates, caps on debt levels, and regulatory limits on service charges. This slide should look familiar because the conditions for disclosure requirement are the exact same as what we outlined before. Remember that all of the following must be true. A, the risk is known before issuance of the financial statements. B, the event is more likely than not to occur within the next year. And C, the event could significantly impact financial position or services of the local government. So there were two bolded phrases that you're probably asking about as you're looking at these slides. How does GASB define more likely than not? Well, it's really a probability threshold, specifically meaning the chances the event will occur are greater than 50%. As you're reviewing, ask yourself this basic question. Based on what we know today, is there a better than even chance this could cause problems within the next year? If yes, and the impact could be significant, you likely have disclosures under GASB 102. So that brings us to our next bolded phrase. How does GASB define significant impact? Well, they really don't. From a practical perspective, think about how this event would affect the local government to continue providing services at current levels, or meet obligations as they become due. Some examples include material declines in revenue sources, like a single source employer closing and tax revenues plummeting, or regulatory changes that limit operational capacity. Think about a cap on water usage. That would be significant. When reviewing, ask yourself this basic question: would this event or condition make it hard for the government to pay its bills or keep running services at their current level? And would our financial statement users care? Think material here. If yes, it is likely a disclosure under GASB 102. Now that we know what can create the requirement of disclosure, let's talk about where and how we show these disclosures. These will be in the notes to the financial statements and should include the following: description of the risk or constraint, potential impact to the government's financial statements, and relevant details of the risk or constraint, including timing, source, or uncertainty. The next slides provide us some examples for municipalities, park districts, libraries, and fire districts. Starting with our first example here, we have a municipality that relies heavily on a single manufacturing plant for property tax revenue. However, this plant did announce closure within the next year. This would significantly reduce the municipality's revenue, and a disclosure is likely required. Our second example is if the state imposed a cap on property tax increases. This would limit the municipality's ability to raise funds. This would significantly impact services within the next year, and disclosure is likely required. From a park district perspective, we have an example related to a single funding source. Imagine this park district receives a substantial grant from an agency that constitutes a major portion of its budget. If the grant isn't renewed, operations will be heavily affected. And with that, a disclosure is likely required. Another example is if the park district has reached its debt capacity and cannot fund future planned capital projects. This would definitely impact financial health within the park district, and a disclosure is likely required. Next, we have a couple examples related to libraries, the first being dependence on a specific tax. If legislation were proposed to eliminate or reduce this tax, and it's more likely than not to pass within the next year, disclosure is likely required. Additionally, maybe a library is facing facility constraints and zoning restrictions, and lack of funding could hinder these services. Disclosure may likely be required. Lastly, we have a couple examples related to fire districts. So think about the volunteer workforce. If a fire district relies on volunteer firefighters and a significant number of these volunteers plan to retire or resign with no replacements secured, this could lead to potential service disruption. And due to that, a disclosure is likely required. Lastly, if a fire district cannot procure the necessary equipment due to budgetary constraints imposed by external regulations, this would significantly impact operations, and disclosure may be required. Thank you so much for listening to our webinar related to GASB Statement 102, Certain Risk Disclosures. We have various resources on our website if you toggle over to the news section. Additionally, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to one of our audit partners listed here, Jamie Wilkie and Melissa Juntinen. You can also reach out to your service provider at Lauterbach and Amen.